All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Town Hall meeting on Transformative Research, Creativity, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship. This is, of course, the second pillar in our strategic planning activities. As I get started, let me also remind you that Jim Garrett, Dean of our College of Engineering, and I, Farnham Jahanian, VP of Research, are co-leading this area. But we're very fortunate to have a number of colleagues from across campus that are serving on two parallel committees, one on research and creativity and the other one on innovation and entrepreneurship. Needless to say, these two groups are overlapping in terms of their focus. Gary Fetter and Manuela Villa. So Gary's here. Gary, wave. Okay, great. And Peter Boatwright, who's not here, and Cindy Lamaro, who's here, are the co-chairs, and we have a number of people from the subcommittee who are also here. Can you raise your hand so that everybody sees who you are? Great. Much of what you see is due to the hard work of a number of people on the committee who have come to all the meetings and have been participating in brainstorming session. In the interest of time, we're going to present very quickly and then open it up for a conversation with you folks that are here. Let me just set a little bit of a global context, invite Jim to talk about some of the internal context, and then we'll have Gary and Cindy talk about the 4 goals plus some of the strategic recommendations that we've come up with. What I want to remind you is that the goal of this town hall is to hear from you, and more importantly, don't read too much into what we present. Nothing is set in stone. The goal is really to engage you in a conversation. I think all of you recognize that we're in a period of rapid and profound social, economic, and technological transformation that's accentuated by global competition. So the global context or the external factor for our subcommittee, but more importantly for the strategic direction of the university, is anchored around a number of important points. One is that we live in a borderless knowledge enterprise, and access has been democratized partially through technology. We also recognize that many of our pressing societal challenges, whether it's healthcare, sustainability, energy, national security, transportation, these societal challenges require interdisciplinary approaches. And as all of you know, Carnegie Mellon is extremely well positioned because of its interdisciplinary DNA, if you will. The other point is that we live in a world that's the demographics are shifting without any doubt domestically. For example, as a data point, 60% of the population growth that we're going to see between now and 2050 are going to be Hispanics. We need to be prepared for that. This is not just about broadening participation. It's also understanding significant demographic changes that we see, and also shifting economies that we see internationally. Consider the fact that for the past 50 years, the success that we've had, I should say, the societal benefit that we've enjoyed, and the economic success that we've seen in this country is to a large extent because of investment in education and research. And what you're seeing is that internationally, the rest of the world has figured it out. So the ticket to prosperity is investment in education and research, and we see that internationally as well. We're also live in a world where there's an increasingly competitive landscape for universities, not just for this institution, but many of our peers. Very quickly, during a period of flat or no growth in federal research budget, we have to worry about other streams of revenue potentially. Of course, there's an increasing expansion of global footprint, and Carnegie Mellon is doing well on that front. There's intense competition, not only for students, especially graduate students, but also intense competition for recruiting talent to campus, faculty recruitment, and retention and development is an important priority. And finally, I'm sure the other group has talked about it, Pillar 1, growth of MOOCs and also technology-enhanced learning, which is potentially reshaping or transforming education business and universities' business model. Finally, universities are playing an increasingly important role in the innovation ecosystem. We're becoming much, much more central to that, driving regional and national economic growth. With that, let me turn it over to Jim to talk about some of their internal factors. Jim?
Thanks, Farnham. The First is that we have a long history here at Carnegie Mellon of pioneering new fields of inquiry. Machine learning, the robotics activity that we've had here are just a couple of examples. There have been low barriers to starting new things and therefore allowing for a lot of organic growth. And the other thing we have done here since the days of Dick Sire is to be very intentional about what we will do and won't do, and that it translates into the overall university's composition. But also, even if you go down and look in each department, you'll see there is that kind of a conscious, intentional decision. We have an interdisciplinary ethos that comes out in almost every conversation that we have, and a bottom-up culture that is a culture of entrepreneurship and risk-taking. We have strong integral ties with our region's heritage, and the economic development of the city and the impact that Carnegie Mellon has had on that economic development is quite obvious. We have both a strong global reputation and a growing presence globally, but it's only in limited disciplines and only in certain very specific regions in the world, and we're notably absent from some very important regions, notably Latin America. We have also a lot of interest in and engagement from industry and activities with our local and regional governments, as well as engagements with artistic institutions. And finally, I don't think I'm telling anybody in this room something that we don't know. We have an insufficient endowment that severely limits the central support that can be provided for RCIE activities, and this leads to a lack of diverse funding sources. We're heavily dependent on federal support for our scientific and engineering-related research activity, and it also leads to a paucity of funding in other areas that we do so well here at the university. And then it also shows up in a limited amount of support for our infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure and the research support infrastructure. So to summarize the 4 goals, and then we're going to turn it over to Cindy and Gary to actually lead discussion on these 4 goals. The 4 goals that we're working on at this particular point relate to reputation, environment, culture, and infrastructure. The first is that we would like to as a goal, to be acknowledged for excellence in the research that we do, and the significance, excellence not just in the research that we do, excellence in all of our activities, and the significance of our contributions in our research, in our artistic endeavors, in our scientific discoveries, and so on. Second, we'd like this environment that we are in to be nurturing of all forms of inquiry, inclusive and networked, that we have this interdisciplinary ethos, and we would like to see a much greater amount of activity across the entire university network, and taking advantage of that interdisciplinary culture. Finally, we want to have Carnegie Mellon be a very broad and inclusive culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Right now, there seems to be hotbeds of that activity. In other places, it's less so, and the support for that across the university is growing, and we see Carnegie Mellon as the academic destination for those who want to learn about, practice, and actually implement innovation and entrepreneurship-oriented activities. And finally, we want to develop an infrastructure here at Carnegie Mellon that is supportive of the RCIE activities. And by infrastructure, we don't just mean space, we mean staff, we mean some resources for helping seed new research and artistic activities. And we want it to be creative and effective. So, and of course, comprehensive, covering all the different areas of our endeavors here at Carnegie Mellon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy, who will lead discussions on the first goal.
Great. So we all know that we're great and we have this wonderful reputation, but we want to actually increase that reputation to become more widely acknowledged, not only in research, but in creativity and our contributions of societal significance. So what the committee has done is come up with some possible strategies that could get us towards that goal, and that's what we would like to discuss with you today. We want to elevate CMU's participation in global conversations of issues of societal importance. Establish internationally recognized awards. For example, recently the very prestigious Tony Awards on Broadway asked the School of Drama to partner with them on an education award that will be given out on a yearly basis to that inspirational teacher. And the advertising that the School of Drama got from that, we now audition 1,800 actors for 32 spots. So, that kind of publicity is enormous. We want to look at creating mechanisms for CMU to influence federal research and priorities and funding levels, and also increase CMU faculty and staff recognition and nomination for prestigious awards. And then finally, to attract more high-profile individuals as what we're calling distinguished service professors to raise visibility and expand networks. So with the time that we have, we figured out we have about 15 minutes of discussion for each goal. So we'd like to open it up to you for thoughts about some of these strategies, the goal itself, or if there are other ideas that you have that you would like to add to the mix. Because as Farnham said, none of this is finalized yet. It's all for a jumping off point for discussion. Yes.
Well, I'll just get it started. I'm Stephen Brockman from the department.
Using the microphone, there's just a few people on the webcast as well. That's
Oh,
okay.
I'm Stephen Brockman from the Department of Modern Languages. And I'll start it off with the creation of mechanisms for CMU to influence federal research priorities and funding levels. I'm in the humanities. I teach in the Department of Modern Languages, like I said. And the federal funding for humanities research, particularly in languages and other areas, has really gone way down in the last couple of years as a part of dysfunctionality in Washington and on Capitol Hill. And the last 6 years or so, I've been to DC for National Humanities Awareness Week, and I've done some lobbying. And I think it would be really good if Carnegie Mellon could also lobby on Capitol Hill for humanities research as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that. I'm sorry. My name is Kenya Dworkin, and I'm also in modern languages. When you talk to me about global conversations on issues of societal importance, I can't help thinking that our school is extremely well positioned to bring many kinds of tools to bear on these issues, but that there are tools that are needed in conversations that come from the humanities that are absolute necessities. That yes, the technology will move some of these things or make them more accessible, but research for humanities, money for research in the humanities, or this support for courses and initiatives that involve faculty and students addressing current issues, in international issues, having to do with security, freedom of speech, civil rights, all kinds of things that do affect us directly and somewhat indirectly in some cases, I think need to be on the table when you're thinking about support, because we need that to go hand in hand with all these other more technical and scientific approaches to problem solving. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Can I ask a question, follow up with a question for you folks? Do you see other sources of funding for research in humanity and creative work, scholarly work in humanities, besides federal funding? I totally appreciate, having spent 4 years in DC, the dysfunction in DC and also challenges for social science and humanities. Do you see
I'm not going to say there aren't any other sources of funding, but there aren't many, and it's also not a lot of money. And sometimes the parameters around that money are very restrictive in terms of what you can focus on. And even the National Endowment for Humanities, decides on a particular focus that leaves out many other things that may need equal attention. And I think there are other people in the room that can address that. So yeah, there may be some of it's small money. But it doesn't allow us to think big in the way that people in some of the other disciplines in this room can think.
Can I respond to that too? I was just in Germany on a Fulbright last fall, so I did get some federal money, but I only got half of what I asked for, partly because the federal Fulbright budget has gone down by over 50% in the last few years, and so the German government has sort of filled some of that gap. So there are other sources, and in my field, one of the big sources is the German government, which is much more generous than the United States government, at least at the time being. But the problem is that the German government can't, as much as they have goodwill, they can't take up the slack for everything, and they don't want to take up the slack for everything. So I'm sure that's part of what Chancellor Merkel talked about, actually, with Obama last week when she was in Washington, D.C. But there is actually, I think, at the moment, some bad blood between the German government and the United States government, because the U.S. government funding has been going down, like this. And so the German government funding has been going up, but they're unwilling to do that sort of indefinitely.
And to add to that, then there are people like myself who work on countries that are in a position to provide. I work on Cuba. And this is a very hot issue right now, and yet, I can't expect the Cuban government. There's no mechanism for me to apply for money, and that's true of many developing countries. So you can't go to those countries for their support.
What about foundations? I'm curious, how much support do you think there is in foundations, or how can we approach them?
I do a lot of work in the nonprofit world outside of my CMU hat, so to speak, and I can tell you that the foundations that deal with societal good, human service and stuff are getting more and more specific. The Pennsylvania Humanities Council, for example, now is very much more restrictive in terms of the small amount of funding it gives to initiatives in Pennsylvania, and so if you want to bring something from outside Pennsylvania to Pennsylvania for people to share and to mutually learn, they're no longer supporting that and stuff like that. So foundations are tough.
There are some there's some foundation money for German stuff, but it tends to be more sort of practical and problem solving kinds of things. So like in international relations, but less so in the humanities. There's some, but a little bit less.
And I think issues also that you're raising are very similar to what we have in the College of Fine Arts as well. That's a huge, the funding doesn't exist, so we have to find ways to create that funding and mechanism to support the big ideas.
And there has to be ability to respond as well. So some of these issues come up, these world issues come up, like, the free speech issues that have come up in the last few weeks, or, the change in policy towards Cuba. We need the flexibility to say, okay, we need a task force on this now and start working. And there isn't any support for that kind of thing.
Lenore?
Hi, I'm Lenore Blunt in computer science. And it strikes me that this might be an area of real collaboration between technology and humanities. Yes. Particularly Latin America is a place where both the cultural issues are really critical, but also technology. And it could be an area that I haven't heard anybody talk about here too much. It's probably
I would love to see that happen with Cuba, but Cuba at the moment has 5% internet penetration. So, we're talking about a place with very bad broadband where only 5% of the population has regular access.
So it seems to me this could be an area where we could lead the way in
yes.
collaboration between technology and humanities, particularly maybe focusing even on Cuba.
Yeah.
I know a lot of our students would be really excited.
Yes, and faculty.
See, your turn.
Sí, claro que sí.
Are there any strategies that you see missing from our list in terms of reaching our goals?
I'll add something that may overlap a bit with some things we may talk about later. I'm not sure what's coming up. But in terms of elevating recognition and visibility of things going on at CMU, I think we could do a better job of helping our startup companies get out there and our projects that are aiming towards startup companies get out there to conferences like showcases of university technology startups that happen like in DC and New York. They have hundreds of large companies and investors there. Our startups almost never go to them. They don't know about it. They don't have the support to go to it. We're doing some things at South by Southwest that can be expanded. The Consumer Electronics Show, just a whole bunch of different things where perhaps if we have micro grant programs, like if you have a good argument why it makes sense for you to go to this conference, here's a couple $1,000.
Okay. Other thoughts related to strategies or ideas that you might have?
Cindy?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Amy Berger, the Vice Provost for Education. I'm curious, at one of our town hall meetings, there was the discussion of CMU's excellence has always been related to trying to think where, or I think Nathan said it's skating to where the puck will be. And so I'm wondering around the global conversations, not just of issues of current societal importance, but utilizing our strategic strengths across the university to predict, like we have in the past, what's the next era of problems or generation of technologies or opportunities that we could try to work towards. So I just want to be sure that we don't miss capturing the sort of secret sauce that I think has allowed CMU to be where it's been over the past.
Good.
That's a great comment. Can I sort of elaborate on what you said and invite our colleagues to chime in? I think I'm relatively new to campus, but what's unique about Carnegie Mellon is our ability to chart new territories, to be able to not predict the future, as one of my colleagues in computer science used to say, is to invent the future, if you will. So one of the things that our subcommittees, the working group has, I don't want to say struggled with, trying to come up with a strategy is, how do you create a nurturing environment such that our colleagues here can set the global agenda, can sort of create new areas of exploration that have not been mined or haven't been discovered yet. So any ideas you have in terms of how we can nurture that kind of a culture, which has been really key to success of this institution, is appreciated by this working group. Echoing what Amy was just saying.
Well, I don't know if this is a direct response to that, but I guess in some ways maybe it is. I mean, I noticed that in the description there was, on the one hand, there's excellence, right? We want to achieve excellence and maintain excellence, and on the other hand, there's significance. And that made me think a little bit about, okay, so what constitutes excellence on the one hand, and what constitutes significance on the other hand? And so is the significant, is that going to be applied research, and then the excellent is going to be sort of pure research? Are we talking about that? Or are we talking about other kinds of distinctions? And I mean, when you're talking about pure research, let's say in the College of Science or in the Humanities College or whatever, it's not always going to have a direct application that's immediately obvious. But I think it's at the moment I think we're relatively free, at least in the humanities, with limited funding to pursue the kinds of excellent research that we want to pursue. So, I mean, I think, to achieve that kind of excellence, you need freedom. And I think that is something that we do have, at least in my college. But then, humanities research, pure humanities research, doesn't cost as much, right? As research, in computer science or engineering, right?
Okay, I think we could move on to goal 2 then, just trying to get through all of the goals, so I'll turn it over to Gary.
All right. That took 12 minutes, so we're ahead of time, so we can be verbose later, I guess. In the spirit of even more busy slides, here's goal 2. We had, I think, a couple extra strategies we thought of for this one. This has to do with our ability to have the research, creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship enterprise as a broad and inclusive network of exploratory activities. And the key here at the end is this area of inclusivity. This includes creative endeavors, it includes basic discoveries, it includes translational innovations. It's across the board. So as we look at that, and that's kind of a mouthful, the strategies that we'd come up with in the subcommittee so far for this have to do with providing opportunities for serendipitous interactions. This is the networking part, to build connections, share interests, encourage generation of novel ideas. This probably fits somewhat, Amy, in your comment you made, but kind of drilling down a little bit. The second strategy, to protect and nurture research and other forms of academic expression driven by intellectual curiosity. So it's not all about innovation, it's not all about any one thing. The third is supporting establishment of cluster hires, so we can bring diverse expertise to interdisciplinary initiatives. This is also a mechanism to perhaps pull colleges together to cross-disciplinary hires. The fourth is to create mechanisms to stimulate meaningful bottom-up collaboration between faculty, staff, and students with diverse disciplinary backgrounds. This happens both with forums and things, of course, like the type of seed funding that we're seeing through the university. The second to last bullet here is to identify and implement new flexible ways to work with the private sector and with nonprofits. The last is to expand the range of creative work eligible for consideration and promotion and tenure decisions. We may have come up with other strategies, but we ran out of room on the page. So I'll, believe the floor is wide open to this area of networking and inclusivity across so it's about connectivity and inclusivity across the spectrum. Are we hitting the right buttons? And I'll set the stopwatch. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm always the one who starts, but I think that we could do more, just, at least in some areas. Last spring and then even now, as the whole problem with Ukraine and the Russian intervention in the Ukraine was happening, which is one of the most significant things that's happened in Europe, in the last 10 or 20 years, I was thinking, why aren't we having some sort of, workshop on this? This is an important event. It's an event of international, global significance. It's important in Washington. It's important in Europe. And as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but I don't think we've yet had a kind of interdisciplinary, dialogue about the problem in the Ukraine. And we have people, in the Department of History or in other places who are actually experts in Russia and in Eastern Europe, but it hasn't happened. I think, tomorrow and then next week, I think we're having a discussion about the Charlie Hebdo massacre in France last month. So I think there is going to be something there, but it's very kind of haphazard, and I think we could do more. This is not just a research thing, it's also in some ways a pedagogical thing. I think we could do more to make our students aware of the importance of the world and what's going on in the world.
Great point.
Yeah, following up on Steve's comment and also what Amy said before, we already know that there are issues that aren't going to go away, over the next any while, like immigration on the global level. we know that Europe is dealing with immigration. That's not going to go away. We know that this is an ongoing problem for us, and it's an ongoing policy problem right now that's created a lot of division in our own country. We know things like certain health issues, like epidemics and things like that. We could already identify a group, a handful or more of things that we should be doing ongoing. We should be having ongoing conversations about, from which could spin weekend courses, from which could spin a course, a semester-length course, a seminar in Washington, et cetera, et cetera. And we already know that, and so it's, to think about these, they're not going to go away. And so we can, and I'm sure that people in this room could, could talk about this in their own disciplines. There are things that aren't going to go away, but we can't always be reactive. We need to be more proactive. And, so this thing, the Charlie Hebdo, I'm thrilled that it was happening, although tomorrow's is being canceled because of the student one on Friday, and it's going to be rescheduled, but it's reactive. And, okay, some things demand reaction, but on the other hand, you can be ahead of these things. See, this is not a new issue. So thinking about what you're saying.
Excellent point, and ties, I think this, I can't remember if it was Farnham or Jim talking about how we do have spillover between these goals, and certainly this area of societal significance and the area of how we network as a community here, they can go hand in hand, and they should go hand in hand. Other comments? Oh, way in the back.
Joel Greenhouse from Statistics. I was wondering if you could share with us how you were thinking about the following. To encourage and support interdisciplinary activities CMU has always been famous for that. But it's not the sort of thing that you get credit for often in promotion and tenure. So I'm curious if you've sort of fleshed that out a little bit. I know your last bullet has to do with promotion and tenure, but have you given that some thought, or are you just putting it out there, this is something we need to address?
Yes. We certainly haven't created a prescription for the problem that will solve it. These are strategies of things to consider and work on. So I think the next step is that certainly under some of these would be specific actions we could take. We haven't gotten to that as a committee at this point. Certainly one of the things hopefully we can spur as a result of this, and maybe online, is if you think of specific actions that fall under these strategies, that gee, we really should do this specific thing, type it in or let us know, because these are all items that will help us create a strategic planning report that has teeth in it and ties to the metrics that certainly the administration, that certainly SUBRA wants to, so that we can be accountable for the strategic plan.
What do you think? Should we include entrepreneurial activity as a consideration for promotion and tenure?
It may not be the sort of thing to get you into National Academy. So, we're trying to balance certain things. So in my department, in statistics, unlike other statistics departments, if you publish methodological work that helps advance some other science, that gets equally weighted and gets credit as if you're developing and advancing statistical science itself. And I think that's probably somewhat true across this university. I mean, it's one of the things I think many of us have liked about Carnegie Mellon. But perhaps it's not as well known and appreciated, maybe even by junior faculty. Sure, Jim.
One of the differences that I saw from my experience as head of the dean is that where you select letter writers and the broadness or the narrowness with which you select letter writers, you can tell which departments have a little bit more of a broader view on that, and those that still stick to a very narrow definition of who should be speaking to the quality of their candidates. And so I think we do need to have, I think this last point is just meant to say we need to have an open and frank conversation about whether our promotion and tenure policies align with what we see as the sort of more strategic directions that we want to see the university move
Sure. I've heard in one of the town hall meetings, John Mahosky defending our current promotion tenure system, which puts off tenure maybe to year 9 or 10 because it gave people an opportunity to get into new areas, get involved in interdisciplinary research. On the other hand, I think we may potentially be losing in terms of recruitment and retention with that system. And so if we were just sort of thinking outside the box, if we were to go to the more usual tenure system, how would we, then it gets even harder to encourage that sort of activity and give credit for it.
We might not see it.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, actually, you remind me of an issue that, I mean, I've been here 21 years, and I remember that one of the first shocks that I got was that the consideration of what language I would publish in would be an issue. And, you know, it seemed like a no-brainer to the person who was presenting it to me as a problem, and it seemed like a no-brainer that it was not my problem. And I said, you know, you want me to be conversant with the scholars in my field? Well, guess what? Outside this country, and in all these other countries, they're doing it in another language. And so therefore, to be honest as a scholar, I have to stay, you know, I have to be conversant with them too. And so if you need to rely on outside readers more than you might like to, that's not my problem. You know, and about being international and stuff, I think that, you know, this was where I got my first taste of international, but in English. And you know, fortunately, I'm way beyond that now, you know, in terms of a concern. But I've had other colleagues, new colleagues, ask me the same thing and have the same concerns. So, you know, that's just one example of the kind of obstacle. The other thing is that in some disciplines, many of the academic journals have moved to e-journals. That's not true in all disciplines. And therefore, the opinion that publications in those journals get in some disciplines is not as high or doesn't count as much. And so that's another, you know, we are a very diverse place, and a lot of times we have to realize that the one-size-fits-all doesn't work here. It fits badly here. So it's good for us to be able to share experiences, personal experiences and impressions.
We may find that if as according to some of these strategies, if we transform where we have greater networking and we have greater interaction between colleges and departments with cluster hiring, let's say,
right,
that in some sense this makes this issue come even farther to the forefront, because now you would have embedded faculty in a department that you might not have traditionally had, and they're outside the regular mold. Exactly. So we may see, in some sense, I think we'd hope we will see more of this diversity. I think that's where we're headed. So I'll ask the same question. Well, David, you have a comment?
It's a comment more than a suggestion, I guess. It strikes me now as I read the strategy, list of strategies, there's really nothing here that jumps out as speaking to the experience of graduate students and postdocs. It's there are things that are clearly related, but I feel like I think back to my own experience. I think a graduate student in particular is more apt to maintain themselves in one area that they know from which they will get their degree and get a couple publications. And trying to think about mechanisms or ways in which in the next 10 years we can give graduate students and postdocs the flexibility to take more risks in their research endeavors and not have that hurt their ability to finish their degrees either on time or with the funding that they have available. You know, so a lot of times you have a 3 to 5 year kind of window to get, because you know that that's when your grant's running out. So you're not going to take many risks in your experimental approaches and the cross-disciplinary approaches you may take, because you got to get things done in that five-year window. So there's nothing that jumps out of it, maybe aiding and facilitating that process. Maybe as a committee we're going to think about that.
Yeah, but if I may add, so there is a sequel to that, because, for example, in my area, mathematics, if someone has been on a postdoc for 5 years, to me it's a lot of red flags. So, and the same thing applies to PhD degree. So, I mean, these things do have implications.
That's an excellent point. So I was, since there's a lull here in the thought, I'll ask the same question Cindy did earlier about goal 1. Are there other items on here that you might find are missing? You know, that we need to have specific strategies that speak to the way we include all the different type of RCIE enterprise and also how we connect. All right, well, let's, I think we'll move on to goal 3 then for now. We can always come back.
While we're transitioning, if I could just remind folks, we do have about a couple dozen people on the webcast. If you could just use your microphones for your comments, they would really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
So moving on to goal 3, we want to make CMU the academic destination for faculty, staff, and students seeking a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship and providing opportunities to learn, conceive, collaborate, launch, and lead in new endeavors. So along those lines, some of the strategies that we have brainstormed is increase opportunities and ease for connecting with non-traditional expertise on campus. For example, having entrepreneurs in residence or professor of practice, or even reverse the linkages from innovation and entrepreneurship to motivate and inspire research and creativity. Then second, to develop curricula that educates our students in problems identification, problem solving, and innovation sub-skills. And one of the ideas we thought was that there could actually be a minor in innovation and entrepreneurship. Then third, we looked at connecting faculty and organizations across the university engaged in innovation and entrepreneurship to create synergy and leverage strengths. Then provide the foundation for our students, staff, and faculty to be leaders in their life endeavors. And we talked about perhaps there also being certificate programs that could happen in a J term. And then last, leverage alumni and extended community to enrich the RCIE experience on campus. So I'll open up the floor for discussion on any one of these. Thoughts, comments, questions?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I'm on one of the subcommittees. I'm Jay Aronson from History, and I'm on the Research and Creativity subcommittee. So I don't know if I'm allowed to talk, but I'm going to anyway. I just wanted to make the point that I really find that this university fetishizes the idea of the entrepreneur as a business person who makes something. Yes. You're either a business person from Tepper or you're from one of the engineering colleges and you make stuff. And I really want us to get away from that. There are people doing amazing things, starting new endeavors, whether it's an education program or a human rights organization or a theater troupe or a group that provides engineering assistance to people in developing communities. I think that we need to figure out a way of thinking about doing new things and forging new ground without always falling back on the entrepreneur who is in it to either push a product or sell an idea or make money. I really think that would make us a much better university. And I know that entrepreneur has a specific meaning, and we could go back and talk about that, and that it's useful in certain contexts. But I look at this and like every single bullet point has entrepreneur, 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 entrepreneur. And I really want to, and I think it'll make our entrepreneurs better entrepreneurs if they understand the process of doing something new in theater or in art or in an endeavor totally outside of the profit motive. I think that'll make much stronger money makers.
Well, and you raise a good point. This is something that we've actually talked about in our subcommittees because me being from the College of Fine Arts, I'll be the first to say that somebody writing a play that impacts somebody's life is very innovative and entrepreneurial, or starting a theater company. And so I guess it's a question, and I've always been pointing out the language and the vocabulary we use, whether it's inclusive or whether it disenfranchises certain populations. And while we all might use the word entrepreneurial, maybe we have different definitions from different disciplines. But I think that is a good point, that we want to make sure that we are defining all of these approaches, that it's not about a company that makes $1 billion, but that we are, that faculty and staff and students are doing activities beyond just a pure profit. Yes.
Yes, I remember when our new provost came to our department meeting last semester, and this is something that this is the question I posed to you when you brought up the issue of the RCIE, and it kind of always boils down to whatever the product is on the marketplace that can be sold, and that is a very disturbing distillation of what I think goes on at this school. It may be what goes on in a lot of corners of the school, but it ties in with my problem with problem solving, which is that, I mean, I'm glad to see problem identification there, but we have to conceive of problems, I think, differently. So not all, quote, problems have a solution, and sometimes it's got to be negotiation or what. I mean, there are examples of crises in the world today that have to do with different belief systems and stuff, and these things cannot be solved. So I think I think you're selling the students short if you give them. First of all, a lot of them come here because they want a good job. Okay, I mean, we hear this. I hear this from the students all the time. That seems to be their primary concern. How they get there, it seems to be the focus, and they're spending a lot of money to do that. But to sell them this bill of goods that everything has to have a market price and that everything is solvable, I think is problematic. And in fact, the people who do produce some of the things that do have market value stuff need information from the other side of the equation to be able to make those things work in society or valuable. So I agree with you. Thank you for saying that.
Can I ask, Kendra, can I ask you to help us? Where in this language do you see that jumping out at you, and you as well, Jay?
Well, as he said, the use of the word entrepreneur, it implies, and it often implies in the conversations around campus, what's being produced in research that's technology-based or, bioengineering-based or engineering-based, something. As I say, problems go beyond. It's like what they do with the architecture students here. I'm glad that, when they study architecture or in civil engineering, that they have them look at the impact on a community before they build a new building. And so there are things that you can't solve, that you just have to work with, and they're going to stay there, but you have to work with and make the best of it. And I think when you use the language of business, a lot of the language comes right out of business. And I think that's where people can be misled. Things like entrepreneurship make me think of business and new businesses and new products, and maybe we're talking about redefining it, but nevertheless that's like the standing definition.
What if we use terms, is it too close to use terms like entrepreneurial thinking? I mean, that's something that we've talked about as a community. We want people to be entrepreneurial in their thinking, which is very different than necessarily.
Or innovative or whatever.
Innovative, entrepreneurial, creative in their thinking, and critical in their thinking as well. I mean, maybe we could.
I mean, it's about semantics, but the fact is that, if a word evokes a definition mostly, then it's a problem.
I would say that others would have the same reaction if we didn't have entrepreneurial or entrepreneurship in some of our perceived future activity. I can tell you there'd be another group that would be also having a major reaction.
Yeah, several people.
Right there.
I'm Ethan Fisher. I direct the master's program in Engineering and Technology Innovation Management. And the definition of innovation that we use is from the National Innovation Initiative, and it's the intersection of invention and insight to create social and economic value. And there are many, many definitions of innovation out there. And of course, our students hear a different one every week because we bring in people, alumni and practitioners. I think that there is a real interest from our students in social innovation. I see Tim Zach here, and my students are very fond of Tim's classes, and they are starting up initiatives that contribute to that. So I wouldn't sell our community short in terms of really the interest in going beyond just financial interests.
Lenore?
Yes. So I'd like to make a comment that relates to the previous goal and to this goal. This semester I've been going to lots of committee meetings, probably too many, lots of town meetings. But there's one real positive that, and it's really to hear the points of view of colleagues in other schools and departments whom I would never meet in the normal course of my day or my week or whatever. So my first thought is it would really be nice if we could have faculty seminars of people across disciplines just getting to know each other, what we do, what motivates us, and all of that. And that actually then addresses this, because our views of entrepreneurship, that's more like what Jim said, entrepreneurial thinking, our students all say they want to have impact. And it's not, you don't see the dollar signs in them, except students who might be looking just for jobs. But those who are more entrepreneurial are really passionate to have some impact in the health world. Actually, I just remembered that I had said that we hadn't done anything with technology and social things, but there's something called Tech Bridge World coming out of computer science, where our students actually go all over the world. I don't think they've gone so much to South America, but so there is something there. And we just don't know about all these different things. So I think that the view of, I actually have to be a mathematician. I probably am the most theoretical person in the School of Computer Science. And so my original thinking is really just proving theorems, and that's the value of everything. But in the broader sense, I do see the value, and it's not just the monetary value. It's really getting your ideas out there and having some impact in society. And in fact, this program that we do have a grant from National Science Foundation, ICOR, really is an attempt to take the science that we do here at the university and somehow have a societal impact with it. And that's really the goal of much of our things. So I think there may be a lot of miscommunication, and also, not just that, I really love to hear about what my colleagues are doing. So more meetings are really good. I would love to have a seminar.
Good.
So this is connected to both the previous one and to this one. I mean, I think there still are a fair number of departmental and college, barriers actually to interdisciplinary, innovative, entrepreneurial work. And let me give you an example. One of my major teaching and research concerns is film. And there are a lot of people at Carnegie Mellon who are really interested in film. There are people in the history department who are interested in film. There are people in my department, modern languages, who are interested in film. There are people in English who are interested in film. There are people in the College of Fine Arts who are interested in film. There are, I think, people in even, some of the other colleges that are interested in film. But we still don't really have, a film studies major, right? We don't have that. We have a Center for the Arts and Society. We have a Humanities Center. But it's somehow in film, even though a lot of other universities do it, it's never come together, and I think that's basically because, in spite of everything, there are barriers. And I'm sure that's not the only area. It's the one area that I know the most about where it hasn't happened. But I think it can happen in other areas as well.
And that's true in terms of the barriers there are, at least in our experience, to team teaching, which are financial. And also because some departments have an issue with how that's going to count for the faculty member, if it's going to be a whole course or not. There are still barriers. And team teaching, it's finances more than anything else. So, that's an issue. It's been an issue for a long time since we've been here. It's like, I'd like to see, we could learn so much from each other by coming up with an initiative that we work together on from two different sides, and then give that to the students. So everyone, it's a win-win situation, but there are still barriers.
Yes.
Excuse me, Linda Gentile, Office of International Education. My academic background is humanities and social sciences, so I appreciate those comments. But from the meaning of entrepreneurship in terms of starting a business, I'll wear my international hat and say, going back to someone's comment about advocacy, if this is the goal, meaning business and money making, and factoring in that a third of our population, slightly more, are non-immigrant students, and some of our faculty and staff who might be also included here are also non-immigrants. I think one of the things we need to consider is how far will Carnegie Mellon want to jump into the advocacy world? And I would say we would need to jump in a little bit more than we have if we want a huge segment of our population to be successful in this area. Otherwise, as Lenore well knows, we are encouraging something that is quite difficult for our international students to do. And immigration reform is a problem, I think, as we all know. But you know, I advocate in my professional association. I've been to Capitol Hill, but my professional association alone is not sufficient. This will take major educational institutions. This will take institutions partnering with businesses.
And
I think it needs to be part of our strategy.
Yes.
If we want to accomplish this goal.
Yes, in the back.
So a couple of things. I think, I think one of the things that we could do in this regard is really play up the idea of entrepreneurship, but also play with it. So I think one of the most inspirational talks I've heard in the past 10 years is actually Hallie Donner, Jerry Cohen's daughter, talking about the creation of Attack Theater, which is a high school theater troupe that she started at a charter school and has kind of moved it out, and the trials and tribulations of the students and what it's given them. And I mean, it's the entrepreneur story par excellence of, someone telling her she couldn't do it, basically, or there being no resources, and she went up and did it, damn it. And and it hasn't been perfect, but it's an amazing story, and it's successful, and it produces social goods and all that kind of stuff. So I think we could do entrepreneurship, but it would be really cool is if we became known for kind of exploding the idea, well, exploding is not a good word, of sort of really pushing the idea of entrepreneurship. I know Tim in Heinz has done a lot of that, but it always seemed like the social innovation thing was like a tiny little corner, and then there was everything else. And it would be great if we could play with it a little more. And I think another strategy for Carnegie Mellon becoming better known is just going out there and really pounding the pavement for things that we all believe in, like immigration reform, and not being so timid, and not worrying about offending our donors, and about pissing off the federal government. And I mean, being bold is one way of making a name for yourself. We obviously have to be careful and not be stupid, and we have a team of lawyers probably running around telling us we can't say that, we can't do that, we have to do this, we have to do that. But I think it would be interesting if we were a little more bold as an institution, and we're a little more loud. And I don't know how to do that and balance all of the things that we need to balance, but I think that would be really cool. I think I would be really proud to see Carnegie Mellon coming out in favor of immigration reform, even if it did nothing.
Joel.
Joel Greenhouse. I might be missing this in this goal, but don't we also want CMU to be a place where people who do theory and think deeply within their discipline to also be a place that attracts them? And I don't see that represented here in this goal.
We have that, so we lost a bullet.
Yeah,
it was
there. We lost a bullet. I took a bullet for the
Oh, maybe it's a different goal. I know there's a bullet like that.
It's in the second one.
But it should be in a goal, right? Not as a bullet, but it's got to be in a goal.
There are 4 goals. This is the third, and then the first 2 goals, it's in those 2.
So this is the first goal.
Should we have entrepreneurship in all 4 goals? So.
And it's also in goal 2.
And here's goal 2.
I actually appreciate the comment. There's a visceral reaction to the word entrepreneurial, and I want to explore that a little bit. Not to argue it, but just to explore it. Because Jim asked the question, was there something about this goal or the description that let you believe that we were talking about business creation? I think your response was, no, that's just a context. This is what we were hearing outside. So that's absolutely true. So in fact, we were very careful, although we haven't done the appropriate amount of words and everything. For this one, every place we said entrepreneurship, we actually said innovation and entrepreneurship, partially following up on the definition of innovation that you gave, which I think is right on the mark. Because it's not about just inventing things for selling, but also it could be inventing things that lead to social good, which is part of definition. So in this one, the goal here really was to focus on an aspect of our mission, if you will, that actually our students are perhaps ahead of us. And I'm going to invite Lenore to chime in a second. Because actually our students are very much hungry for this. It's not about business creation, as it turns out. In fact, much of the good work that Lenore and others have done in Center for Entrepreneurship and the work that you've done, Peter, and others in IRI, focuses on training or teaching students to think differently about problem solving. So in fact, it's not about, sure, we have an Office of Technology Transfer, we have gap funding for students who have invented something that they want to take it out. And in fact, there's significant appetite for that. That's given. But much of the focus of the entrepreneurial activities and innovation activities on campus really is education oriented. The focus on training students to think about problem solving differently. And I think if we can capture that in our narrative, it will probably address the issue that you're addressing, which is not about business creation, it's really about different way of thinking about problem solving, which may lead in fact to a lot of social good with no trace of any profit. Lenore, do you want to add anything to this? Because this is partially your passion.
Well, you know, there's like lots of good student examples. Soul Power, there's 2 students who were mechanical engineering students had a capstone project where they learned how to change, you know, some kind of energy into energy that could be used for something. And then in the incubator, they were thinking of, well, how could we really make this very useful? And it's insole. And as you walk, you convert energy into something you can power your cell phone. But their first area of interest was going into developing countries where people did not have, you know, they didn't have access to electricity. And that's really their key. That was what they were thinking about. That's really their passion, where they're going from. So here's something, 2 students, male and female, very nice, going through engineering, having some ideas and then transforming it into something that's more social good. But there's also things that are, you know, it could be drama related, or it doesn't have to be just social good, it can be
artistic.
Yeah. But I think you can go example after example where our students really are combining what they're learning in one, actually probably better than we do. Taking what they learn in one area and another area and discussions on campus, bringing it to fruition in a way that's much more comprehensive maybe than any of us.
One final comment, and then we're going to move on to goal 4.
Final comment, concrete suggestion. I'm Scott Sandage, I'm the chair of the Faculty Senate. What if we were to invest some resources in both research expertise and graduate and undergraduate curriculum on social entrepreneurship and innovation? That would be the correlate of ideate, and we call it agitate.
That'd be great.
The name is a joke, but I think the idea, you know, to have something that's on the scale of ideate,
yes,
as a university branding device, but that expands the idea of entrepreneurship in the ways that have been talked about. Because I don't think there needs to be any hostility coming from the humanities or the arts towards business or technical innovation. I think the proof in the pudding is what we mean by these words, which are the words that are used and the words that need to be used. But if we were to put some resources into social innovation and change on the same level, that would take care of, I think, some of the issues that are being raised today.
Excellent. Good point. Okay, Gary?
Maybe Peter wants to do this one. The last goal, we've got about 15 minutes left, so pretty good timing. This is, to some extent, nuts and bolts. The last goal is to provide comprehensive, creative, and effective support to enable faculty and staff and students to maximize their opportunities for engagement in research, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship. So this is about the infrastructure. The strategies that we've come up with to date so far are to create an ecology of flexible, non-department-owned space, to provide this temporary space for new ventures to develop and mature, to provide flexible space for students to come together to collaborate and experiment, and maybe to agitate, to establish support and infrastructure to coordinate and compete effectively in high-impact activities having a long-term horizon. And then lastly, to provide top-down support that aids in the growth and development of bottom-up RCIE endeavors, not just necessarily from on high, right? So those are 4 strategies that we've come up with in this area of what I'll just call infrastructure, if you will. So the floor is open for comments on this one. It's your opportunity to vent about infrastructure.
Greg Billy, Director of Campus Services and Risk Initiatives. I noticed that several of these goals talk about faculty, staff, and students, yet in the strategies, staff is not addressed. I'm just wondering what the vision is there on how staff would be engaged in some of these endeavors.
It's a good comment. I think that requires a long discussion. I think you're reading more into some of these bullets than is there, because you're reading the word faculty in some of these bullets where there is no word faculty or students. So staff is included. In fact, that's why it's in the goal. So I think when we talk about non-department owned space, that could include connection to staff. So I think maybe a good healthy way to look at this is, are there specific strategies or actions that focus on staff that we're missing to meet this goal? Maybe that's a way to frame what your concern might be. And I think that would be wonderful to get ideas about that.
Can I also add, just as an aside to the staff, so though this sort of session is focused on research creativity, there's a CMU experience focus area and a sort of subgroup on staff. Matt DeMille, who's here, is leading that along with some other folks. I don't know if Matt, you want to weigh in on some of the ideas around staff. I think the point is well taken, even though it seems like we're not sort of synthesizing across focus areas here in sort of real life. We definitely are. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, one of the things from the staff perspective, Matthew DeMille, I'm the Vice Chair of Staff Council and the Director of the Contracts Office. From the staff side, I sort of, what Greg said was sort of, as an outside observer to the research community and only being sort of somebody who assists in that area to help sort of expedite issues with regard to RCIE. I noticed also what Greg was saying was that there's not so much from a staff point of view, it's not that it doesn't appear, okay? And I understand what you're saying, Gary. The issue that staff has always looked at is, from the staff perspective, we operate in an area to help faculty and students proceed through the process, whatever that process is, whether you want to call it entrepreneurship, innovation, whatever you want to do. Staff is here to assist, and it's our main functions, right? So when certain things are built up here, I always try to figure out, okay, when you're saying create an ecology of flexible, non-department owned space to provide space for new ventures to develop and mature, I always look at the impact that has on staff. So that's really new development, non-department owned space, moves staff into all different areas. So now people start to spread out. Sort of what Laura was saying earlier, if I can do that, that has been a common thread in staff, is that there is no interaction, that this interdisciplinary issue between that faculty seem to raise each time I've been at the town hall is raised constantly with staff, that there's this lack of communication, that people feel very silent. And I think that as a result of that, what some people do in some schools, what staff does in some schools, sometimes can relate to what the staff is not doing in others that can help and improve that. So from the staff point of view, I think that what we've seen is, and speaking from my working group, is that there is more opportunity for staff to be engaged across the university level that could assist in this field and endeavor. And I think that there's some things that have to happen to staff to bring them up to that level, or to move them in the direction sort of that there's there. So I was very curious as to where you guys were today. That's why I'm here, because I wanted to see how staff interplayed with research, which usually is sort of like, we're sort of in the background.
That's an excellent, I think you hit on a nerve, and I know Jim wants to talk about what's going on in the engineering college to tie staff together, and I think there are probably other examples as well.
Well, as an example of exactly the role, as an example that the role can play that you described, Matt, is that Don Kaufeld is our director of FMS, but is very much in offering up the university as a potential laboratory for certain types of activities related to infrastructure. And so that, to me, is a perfect example of where if we think more broadly that staff can play a very important role in not just providing the support service, but to in fact be a more active provider, participant in the research activity.
I mean, another area, just briefly to interject, would be in the College of Engineering, there's been an effort to create a matrix organization where we're pulling the staff at specific functions within different units and bring them together to learn best practices and just event, and just to talk to each other. And I'm not sure how much of that happens across the entire university, but I think that kind of model is, I think, one of the things that might speak to your comment that I think we should put in and probably will. I'm not sure who is next.
I think the space issue is really a problem. I've never been at a university where it's so much of a problem. Granted, this is the one that I know best, so it's not representative. But I mean, it's very difficult to find space that's not departmental and where you can just meet people who are from different departments or from different colleges. And we certainly don't have a lot over in the Dietrich College, but we've even lost a fair amount of space in the library, the library was the place to do that. But I mean, we've actually lost. Ideate is great, if you're connected to Ideate. But for those of us who are not, we've lost a significant amount of space in the basement on the first floor of the library. So it's just, it's tough to find space to meet, let alone the whole classroom issue, which is another thing.
So this is Kevin Paul, I'm the Deputy Director and CTO of SEI. This is related to the staff comment before. We have 600 staff members, 400 of which are technical staff, several hundred of which are directly involved in research, producing research papers, obtaining grants, receive grants internally, and for which we give out grants. So I was in the subcommittee here, trying to make sure the word staff appeared in almost every place where it was being considered. But I just wanted to remind people that there's a whole group of people at this campus with the title staff that are intimately involved in research projects.
And all of our postdocs, at least in many of the colleges, are staff.
Yeah.
So, and some of them are entrepreneurs, other ones are basic researchers. Yeah.
And the other thing is that I noticed, and I may be wrong, but when I think about some of these social initiatives and stuff like that, it seems to me like we're just assuming that the community will be involved. I mean, for example, faculty and staff are members of the community too. And right now, we're participating in this seminar, the Sawyer Seminar in History, and there are members of the community who are not academics from, Pitt or whatever, who are coming because they're interested in the subject. And so I'm just thinking that, if we have a footprint here in southwestern Pennsylvania and in Pittsburgh, and if we're going to remain true to the connection that we have with the region, then we have to consider that a lot of these initiatives have to be open to members of the community. And by community, I don't just mean individuals, but obviously, I mean the business community, the nonprofit community, organizations, et cetera, but that's nowhere explicitly stated in any of this.
I'd just like to follow up on the comment earlier about staff and how having visions about how we can expand this and expand that. You have to also consider, I don't know if Farnham knows this, but you have to consider the implications of that on the staff that has to support those initiatives. So I work in the technology transfer office, and basically our staff hasn't changed in 6 years or something, and our number of invention disclosures is more than doubled in that time. Number of startups has increased. Our pipeline is more than doubled. And we're very well known for entrepreneurship at this university, but we aren't providing the resources to grow at the same level that the activities are. It's not, I don't want to limit it to our office because there's overflow even just of what we do into the Office of General Counsel, Office of Sponsored Projects, and so on.
It just as a follow-up to that, that sort of has been a theme throughout the process with staff. Has always been that staff is sort of ready, willing, and able to participate in this endeavor. But at some point in time, I know the technology transfers maybe had 6 people or 8 people doing all that work over the course of time. It does tax the system, and there is a sort of, there's a frustration, I think, that is served by the general research population, let's say, without lumping people together, that as they move along the process, and you talked about infrastructure, that there is sort of an infrastructure of staff, of human capital here, that's problematic to get things moved as maybe fast as you want to, if you want to start a new program, to have that. And that's been a concern of staff. That's come out in the staff working group and through the staff town hall was clear with regard to that, that there seems to be, you talk about ecology non-department owned. I mean, I would even say to you that maybe there's a part that you could add that's a flexible staff. It's almost like, a staff that sits in a certain category or a certain endeavor that they can be moved from place to fill in, to have sort of an EMS type staff movement. It says, we have a problem, tech transfer has a problem, we need to move these people over there. But, I think there's people that can do that. There's a lot of people that are practitioners and generalists in various areas that can help, do that research work when it becomes overtaxed.
I'm envisioning people in orange hazmats.
But if I can make just 2 quick comments. As I mentioned at the all-hands meeting at the town hall with the staff, I mentioned that in my current role as Vice President of Research, I have only staff reporting to me, whether it's the Tech Transfer Office, whether it's OSB, whether it's ORIT, whether it's government relations, you name it. It's all staff, including SEI, which reports through my office. I think the comments, this is primarily from my faculty colleagues in the room, is that the comments from the staff, I think, right on the mark in terms of our perhaps lack of investment or underinvestment in, let's call it infrastructure. That's human capital. That's various kinds of support services, various kinds of physical infrastructure to support, let me just focus on the research enterprise, to support our research and creativity enterprise. There's no question in my mind. I've shared some data with the deans recently, and hopefully we'll be able to share that on campus. I think just there's been chronic underinvestment by our campus in various kinds of infrastructure in support of our research and creativity endeavor. And I think we've just kept kicking this can down the road. And part of the goal of this, and Gary Federer, Jim, and Peter, and a number of others who've been very passionate about this goal isn't very sexy. It's not very aspirational if you think about it. But in some ways, if you talk to our committee, we believe that this is actually probably our most important goal in terms of being impactful. We can talk about, having greater reputation, having bigger impact, and so on. But this is real stuff in a sense that if we don't do this part of it right, support the faculty and our staff, research staff and so on, in their creative endeavor, in their research activities, then we really cannot raise the aspirations that we have. My view is that our investments are not aligned with our priorities and aspirations. And this goal is intended to address that very issue.
Well, that's well said, and it's probably a great way to segue to the closing statements. We have by Rick. Rick, do you have a couple words to say?
Just a quick logistics wrap up. Thanks everyone for coming. People haven't gotten enough. We will be back here tomorrow at the same time discussing transformative teaching and learning. The last of our selection of 3 focus area town hall meetings. We're going to take a bit of a break from public engagement to focus on some board engagement. We'll be back in March with a date we will announce soon with kind of a broader reporting out town hall across all 3 focus areas. Also look for town hall meetings to be scheduled in either March or April, depending on folks' schedules on diversity and international strategy. I do think it's fair to say that we're sort of starting to cross the threshold between information gathering and really synthesizing, as you can sort of see here. So to the extent you have more comments, feel free to grab us afterwards. Go to the website, cmu.edu/strategic-plan, or shoot an email to strategic-plan@andrew.cmu.edu. That just comes to my email, so I promise you I will read it. And let me just say thanks again for everyone. Farnham, Jim, anything else you want to add?
No, thank you, Rick, for all the hard work you've been doing behind the scenes. It's been really great.
And I'd like to thank everybody in the room for all the excellent comments you gave.
Terrific discussion.
No, it was very useful.
Thank you very much.
Agitated, I like that. I like agitated.
Yes.
So, yeah.